guys, I couldn't be there today. I am actually on my way to Paris right now. So lucky me and sad for you. But I still want to do word of the day. And I've got 3 words of the day today. So you're going to follow along with each word, pause the video when I tell you to pause it, and write stuff in your word of the day form, and go through all of the 3 of them in this one video. So the first word that we need to talk about has to do with what we were talking about in last class. So let me share my screen so you can see how the word is spelled. So the word of the day is euphemism, and a euphemism is a mild or indirect word or expression substituted for one considered to be too harsh or blunt when referring to something unpleasant or embarrassing. All right, so we usually use the word euphemism, like we usually think of euphemisms when you're talking about something like crude. So for example, like instead of saying fart, you'd say pass gas, right? That would be an example of a euphemism. But it can also be just a way of like avoiding hard topics in the English language. Over time, certain words take on a kind of bluntness that people want to talk around something rather than referring to it directly. So an example might be like passed away instead of died. If you said, oh, my aunt passed away, that feels so much better than just saying, oh, my aunt died, because died has a kind of finality to it, right? And passed away, it kind of like sounds like she's just on a journey to somewhere else. Like she's not here, she's away, you know? So we found this way to make our language sound less harsh by substituting, like, you know, essentially they are metaphors, but specific kinds of metaphors called euphemism. Another example might be put down. When you were talking about a beloved pet, for example, you would say put down instead of killed, but I mean, essentially they mean the same thing. Obviously put down has a kind of like style of of being killed, you know, like you don't say you put down something if you killed it violently, right? It's usually something like some sort of injection. So there's something specific going on there, but to put something down essentially means to end its life, right? And we don't want to say that we are ending a pet's life, and instead we're going to say, okay, we are like helping them sort of to lie down and experience something like a bit softer. Or another example, maybe a little less dark, would be like let go instead of fired. He was let go. I had just heard of somebody being fired by them saying like, oh, we are letting you go to experience a new transition in your life. You know, it's like a way, instead of just saying you are fired, you are no longer wanted here. It's like you wanted to leave and we're just going to let you leave. You know, those are all examples of euphemisms, and they're a way that our language is less precise, but it is more caring and it takes account of people's feelings. So another example, and you don't need to write this one down, but another example that was really important to our discussion from last class is using the phrase N-word instead of the real word. And we're going to continue to do that in class. We're going to use the euphemism. And part of that is because of what I just said, which is that it is a way to make the language kinder. A word that has been used in specific ways throughout history to denigrate an entire group of people. And as you watched in the video, to show how people are a threat to you. So you put them down through language and you kind of delineate them and say, no, they are other and we want nothing to do with them. You do this through a word. And when one word can have that much power, that's kind of a sign of just how like hurtful that word is. So we use the euphemism instead as a way of like softening that discussion. And sometimes euphemisms can come across as dishonest. And I have seen a lot of commentary on the use of the N-word in academia, where they talk about how we should be saying it. We should remove it of its power, and we should recognize that it is not like it hasn't just been used euphemistically, obviously, like it has been used to hurt people, and we can't just ignore that hurt. And yet I agree with the video that we watched last class where she's saying, it has an extremely harmful effect in a classroom. And so we're going to keep talking about the use of the word in the text, but we are not going to actually say the word. So in other words, we are using a euphemism. So pause the video right now and write down the effect of euphemism in your word of the day sheets. All right, the next word I want to look at for a word of the day, our second word of the day, is the word dialect. And dialect is a variety of language that a group of people speak, separated either by geography, class, or ethnicity. All right, in Huck Finn, he is explicitly using dialect. He talks about the use of dialect actually at the very beginning of the book. So if you open up the book, you can see how he talks about it in the explanatory note. He says, in this book, a number of dialects are used, to wit, the Missouri Negro dialect, the extremist form of the backwoods Southwestern dialect, the ordinary Pike County dialect, and 4 modified varieties of this last. The shadings have not been done in a haphazard fashion or by guesswork, but painstakingly and with the trustworthy guidance and support of personal familiarity with these several forms of speech. If you'll remember, Mark Twain was born in Missouri. He is very familiar with these forms of speech. I make this explanation for the reason that without it, many readers would suppose that all these characters were trying to talk alike and not succeeding. So what he is saying there essentially is that people are going to accuse me of not having control of the dialect because certain characters sound different from each other. And he's saying that is not the case. I am specifically designating different dialects to different people in this. And you see in the very first paragraph how he's using dialect. He says, "You don't know about me without you have read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, but that ain't no matter." All right, that is your example. So you're going to write down, you're going to copy that down. Let's just say first line of, oops, not Huckleberry Finn. So you're going to actually write that down. You're not going to write down first line of Huckleberry Finn. You're going to write down the way that he says it. And then you're going to pause the video and you're going to think about the effect of using dialect in this book. Many authors choose to represent a certain time period without writing in dialect. They might include a couple little things, but they're not going to have it be such like grammatically, I mean, to an English teacher, grammatically atrocious, right? Because they want to have readability. And Mark Twain is a little bit less concerned about readability here. So under effects, write about why he might have chosen to write this book in dialect, and pause the video while you do that. Okay, the third word that we are going to talk about is the word Quixotic. Yes, it's a word. I feel like if I were there in class today, you would say, that's not a real word. You made that word up. Quixotic is definitely a word. It's exceedingly idealistic, unrealistic, and impractical. And it has a really specific etymology, which is like a history of the word. Quixotic comes from Don Quixote, which is a Spanish novel, sometimes considered the first real novel, actually. And it's about a guy named Don Quixote, who is just a regular old dude who reads a lot. And he reads a lot of adventure books. In the book, they call these romances, but I don't want you to get confused and think that a romance means that there has to be a love story. He's mostly defining it as adventure, which means that there's usually knights and they are going out to rescue fair maidens, and they are like very virtuous and good, and they have adventures along the way. In Don Quixote, the author Cervantes uses that for humorous purposes, and Don Quixote is like always sort of imagining that his life is more spectacular than it is. So the famous example is tilting at windmills. He comes into a field and there's all these windmills and they're spinning, and he tells them he is imagining that they are rival knights, and he's telling them to stop their movement or he will joust with them, and he will take his joust and like knock them over. And of course they're windmills, so they can't listen to him. And so he does it anyway, and he breaks his joust. And we often call that tilting at windmills. So tilting at windmills is a way of being quixotic. It's a way of saying, of like imagining yourself as the hero, being idealistic. And because you're doing that, you're being impractical and you're being unrealistic. So yeah, it's a great word to know. And the example, let's use an example on page 7. So Tom Sawyer is a very quixotic character, and he's quixotic in the way that Don Quixote is quixotic. And in fact, he even references Don Quixote at some point in this book, which I was not prepared for in this video, but you will remember that he, let me pause the video really quick and I will find that for you. I always like being professional in these, hang on. Okay, I found it. Sorry about that. On page 11, Tom and Huck are kind of arguing about their group, and Tom has like made it so that he, in his head, he sees a turnip cart and he imagines that they're jewels. So he's kind of like fitting all of the things of his world into a romance, kind of the way that Don Quixote does when he sees windmills and he imagines that they're knights, because that fits with this preconception of what an adventure should be. And Huck is like, there aren't any elephants, there aren't any jewels, like I don't know what you're seeing, bro. And Tom responds and says, he said, this is right at the top of page 11, he said, if I weren't so ignorant but had read a book called Don Quixote, I would know without asking. He said it was all done by enchantment. He said there was hundreds of soldiers there and elephants and treasure and so on, but we had enemies, which he called magicians, and they had turned the whole thing into an infant Sunday school just out of spite. I said, all right, then the thing for us to do was to go for the magicians. Tom Sawyer said I was a numbskull. So here's Huck, like he doesn't read all of these adventure books, and he's just like, I don't see any elephants. And Tom says, well, they've been enchanted by magicians. And Huck's like, okay, well, the practical thing would be then to go after the magician so that we can actually see the elephants and the jewels. And Tom's like, no, you numbskull, you idiot. Like, no, this isn't the way to do it in books. And that is what, that's one really important distinction between Tom and Huck. So now I want you to go back to page 7. And he says, they're kind of planning what they're going to do with the ransom, and one of the kids asks, this is kind of near the top, must we always kill the people? And Tom says, oh, certainly, it's best. Some authorities think different, but mostly it's considered best to kill them, except some that you bring to the cave here and keep them till they're ransomed. Ransom? What's that? I don't know, but that's what they do. I've seen it in books, and so of course that's what we've got to do. But how can we do it if we don't know what it is? Well, blame it all. We've got to do it. Don't I tell you it's in the books? Don't you want to go to different, sorry, do you want to go to doing different from what's in the books and get things all muddled up? So here is Tom, I think a really good example of Tom being quixotic. So your example for this one is this line where he says, I've seen it in books, and so of course that's what we've got to do. And under effects, I want you to tell me what that reveals about Tom Sawyer and his character. Okay, and that is it for our 3 words of the day today. Make sure they're all in your words of the day sheets.